There is a moment when love stops feeling like a beautiful possibility and starts becoming something real. Something changes. The conversations become deeper. The silence becomes comfortable. The little things suddenly matter more than the grand gestures. You stop wondering whether the other person cares, because their actions begin answering the question for you. And perhaps the most surprising thing about real love is that it doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it begins with one person realizing, I don't want to lose this. Sometimes it begins with a conversation that changes everything. Sometimes it begins when two people finally stop pretending they don't care. And sometimes it begins after a difficult season, when both people have learned enough about themselves to understand what love actually requires. Because real love is not simply the feeling of missing someone. It is not simply attraction. It is not the excitement of receiving a message from someone you like. It is not the temporary rush that makes you think about someone all night. Those feelings can be beautiful. But real love goes deeper. Real love eventually asks a much harder question. What am I willing to do for this person when things are no longer easy? That is where everything changes. When love becomes truly real, you begin seeing the other person differently. You stop seeing only what you want from them. You start seeing their fears, their struggles, their dreams, their insecurities, their history, their imperfections. And instead of using those things against them, you begin wanting to protect them. That is one of the first signs that love has become genuine. You care about their heart even when you are not getting exactly what you want. You care about their peace. You care about their future. You care about their happiness. And suddenly, love becomes less about possession and more about protection. You don't think, how can I make this person stay? You begin thinking, how can I make this relationship healthy enough that neither of us feels trapped? That difference is enormous. Because unhealthy attachment says, I need you. Real love says, I choose you. There is power in being chosen freely. When someone stays because they are afraid to leave, that isn't the same as someone staying because they genuinely want to be there. Real love creates freedom. It doesn't need manipulation. It doesn't need jealousy games. It doesn't need emotional tests. It doesn't need disappearing acts just to see who will chase whom. When love becomes real, games become exhausting. Truth becomes attractive. Clarity becomes valuable. Peace becomes more desirable than drama. And perhaps this is why some people don't recognize healthy love when they first experience it. They have become accustomed to uncertainty. They are used to wondering where they stand. They are used to inconsistent attention. They are used to someone being intensely interested one day and distant the next. So when someone finally becomes consistent, it may feel strange. There is no emotional roller coaster. No constant guessing. No endless decoding of messages. No need to wonder whether a simple change in tone means something terrible. There is simply communication. There is effort. There is respect. And slowly, the heart realizes. This feels different. That difference matters. Because real love doesn't constantly keep you in survival mode. It allows you to breathe. It allows you to be yourself. It allows you to say what you actually feel without being punished for being vulnerable. And that brings us to another powerful change. When love becomes truly real, people begin telling the truth. Not just convenient truth. Real truth. They start saying things like, I was hurt by that. I don't understand what you meant. I need reassurance. I am afraid. I made a mistake. I am sorry. I don't want us to fight like this. I want to understand you. These sentences may sound simple, but they require courage. Pride wants to win. Love wants to understand. Pride says, you should apologize first. Love says, if I was wrong, I can take responsibility. Pride says, I'm not going to message them. Love says, we need to talk about what happened. Pride protects ego. Love protects connection. And when two people begin choosing connection over ego, something beautiful starts happening. The relationship becomes stronger. Not because they never disagree, but because disagreement no longer automatically means destruction. They learn that conflict can be handled. They learn that anger doesn't have to become cruelty. They learn that disappointment doesn't have to become disrespect. They learn that two people can have different opinions and still love each other. This is where mature love begins. Because real love is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to move through conflict without destroying one another. Imagine two people who genuinely care about each other. They have a disagreement. One person becomes upset. The other person could walk away. They could ignore the problem. They could say something cruel. They could bring up every mistake from the past. But instead, they take a breath. They listen. They explain. They apologize. They try again. That moment may not look romantic from the outside. But it is. Because that is love in action. Love is not always flowers. Sometimes love is staying calm when you are angry. Sometimes love is listening when you would rather defend yourself. Sometimes love is admitting that you misunderstood. Sometimes love is giving someone time to process their emotions. Sometimes love is saying, let's solve this instead of trying to hurt each other. That is what happens when love becomes real. And then something else begins to happen. The little things become huge. A person remembers your favorite food. They remember something you said weeks ago. They notice when your mood changes. They ask whether you reached home safely. They know when you need encouragement. They know when you need silence. They notice the small things you don't think anyone notices. And you begin doing the same for them. That is intimacy. Not simply knowing someone's favorite color. Knowing their heart. Knowing what makes them nervous. Knowing what makes them laugh. Knowing what kind of day they are having from the way they say hello. Knowing when they need advice and when they simply need someone to listen. This kind of knowledge cannot be forced. It develops through attention. And real love pays attention. That is why consistency is so important. Anyone can be romantic for one night. Anyone can write a beautiful message. Anyone can promise the world during an emotional conversation. But real love shows itself repeatedly. It appears on ordinary days. It appears when nobody is watching. It appears when there is nothing exciting happening. It appears when life becomes inconvenient. Because anyone can love the exciting version of you. Real love learns how to love the tired version. The stressed version. The confused version. The imperfect version. The version that doesn't have the right words. And you learn to love them the same way. Not because you think they are perfect. But because you understand that perfection was never the requirement. Character was. Effort was. Honesty was. Respect was. And when two people understand this, their relationship begins changing. They stop trying to perform for each other. They become comfortable. They can sit together without speaking. They can laugh at ridiculous things. They can discuss serious problems. They can be vulnerable. They can admit weakness. They can say, "Today was difficult." And instead of receiving judgment, they receive understanding. That is a rare kind of connection. The kind where you don't have to constantly pretend to be stronger than you are. Because you know that someone isn't going to use your vulnerability against you. And when someone feels emotionally safe, they begin opening doors they have kept closed for years. They tell you things they never told anyone. They explain why certain situations scare them. They reveal dreams they once considered impossible. They share memories they normally avoid. And suddenly, two people aren't simply dating or talking. They are allowing each other into their inner world. That is when love becomes powerful. Because real intimacy isn't created by knowing someone's public personality. It is created by knowing who they are when the world disappears. Who are they when nobody is impressed? Who are they when they are afraid? Who are they when they fail? Who are they when they are angry? Who are they when they have nothing to prove? That is where character becomes visible. And real love doesn't run away simply because it discovers imperfections. It asks, "Can we grow?" That question changes everything. Because people who genuinely love each other eventually realize that both of them are still becoming. Neither person has finished growing. Neither person has perfectly healed from every past experience. Neither person always communicates perfectly. Neither person always knows what to do. But they can learn. They can grow. They can become better together. And sometimes the relationship itself becomes a mirror. You begin discovering things about yourself. Maybe you realize you have difficulty trusting. Maybe you realize you become defensive when criticized. Maybe you realize you avoid difficult conversations. Maybe you realize you expect people to understand your needs without telling them. Love can expose these patterns. But exposure isn't necessarily destruction. Sometimes it is an invitation to change. A healthy relationship can make you more self-aware. It can teach you patience. It can teach you communication. It can teach you how to apologize. It can teach you how to receive love without constantly questioning it. And when both people grow, the relationship grows with them. This is what happens when love becomes truly real. The relationship stops being about two people trying to complete each other. Instead, it becomes two people choosing to build something meaningful together. And building requires patience. A house isn't built in one afternoon. Trust isn't either. Trust is created through hundreds of small choices. Keeping your word. Being honest. Showing up. Communicating. Respecting boundaries. Admitting mistakes. Being consistent. Every small decision becomes part of the foundation. And once the foundation becomes strong, something beautiful happens. You no longer need constant proof. You have history. You have evidence. You have memories of difficult moments that you survived together. You have conversations where someone could have walked away but chose to stay and solve the problem. You have moments when trust was tested and protected. That history becomes powerful. It says, "We have already survived difficult things." And that gives people confidence in the future. But real love also understands that trust is precious. It doesn't intentionally create jealousy. It doesn't flirt with other people to get attention. It doesn't use silence as punishment. It doesn't threaten to leave every time there is an argument. It doesn't turn insecurity into control. Because when love becomes real, you stop wanting to win temporary attention at the cost of long-term trust. You start thinking about consequences. You begin asking, will this choice strengthen us or weaken us? That is maturity. And maturity is one of the most beautiful forms of romance. Because romance without maturity can become chaos. But romance with maturity can become partnership. A partnership where both people understand that love is not a competition. There is no winner if the other person loses. There is no victory in proving that you were right if the relationship becomes damaged. Sometimes you have to choose the relationship over being right. That doesn't mean ignoring truth. It means understanding that the goal of communication isn't to defeat each other. The goal is to understand each other. And when two people begin communicating this way, arguments become different. They become opportunities to learn. Instead of asking, how can I prove my point? They ask, what are you actually feeling? What do you need from me? What did I misunderstand? How can we avoid this happening again? Those questions can save relationships. And perhaps this is why real love often feels calmer as it grows. In the beginning, everything may be intense. But intensity is not always depth. Depth develops with time. A deep relationship can have quiet days. Ordinary days. Boring days. Busy days. But underneath those days is something stable. Something that says, I am still here. That is powerful. Because life is going to test every relationship. There will be stressful seasons. There will be family problems. There will be financial pressure. There will be career changes. There will be unexpected responsibilities. There will be moments when one person is stronger and the other needs support. And then the question becomes, can love survive real life? That is where genuine love reveals itself. Not during perfect sunsets. During difficult mornings. Not only during celebrations. During disappointments. Not only when both people are happy. When one person is struggling. Real love doesn't demand that everything remain convenient. It adapts. It communicates. It supports. It asks, what can I do? And sometimes the answer is simply, stay beside me. That can be enough. Sometimes a person doesn't need a solution. They need someone who isn't afraid of their difficult season. Someone who doesn't disappear because things became complicated. Someone who doesn't make them feel guilty for struggling. Someone who reminds them, you don't have to carry everything alone. That is love. And when you experience it, you understand why superficial connections never felt satisfying. Because attraction can make you excited. But emotional safety can make you peaceful. Attention can make you feel desired. But consistency can make you feel secure. Promises can make you hopeful. But actions can make you trust. And when love becomes truly real, actions begin speaking louder than words. You don't have to ask someone to care about your feelings every single day. You can see it. You don't have to beg someone to communicate. They make the effort. You don't have to constantly demand respect. It becomes natural. You don't have to compete for their attention. They prioritize the relationship willingly. That doesn't mean you become their entire world. Healthy love doesn't require that. Both people still need individual lives. Friends. Interests. Goals. Personal space. Growth. But they make room for each other. That balance is important. Real love doesn't say, give up everything for me. It says, become everything you are capable of becoming, and let me support you while you do it. That is partnership. And perhaps one of the most beautiful things about genuine love is that it makes your success feel shared. When something good happens to you, they celebrate. When you reach a goal, they are proud. When you grow, they don't become threatened. They become happy. Because your success doesn't diminish them. It inspires them. And you feel the same about their success. You don't compete. You cheer. You don't secretly hope they fail. You want them to win. That is real love. It wants both people to flourish. And then comes another important change. Forgiveness becomes more meaningful. Not cheap forgiveness. Not pretending nothing happened. Real forgiveness. The kind that includes accountability. The kind that says, "What happened hurt me, but I believe you can do better." Sometimes forgiveness means rebuilding trust slowly. Sometimes it means setting new boundaries. Sometimes it means accepting that a person has changed. And sometimes it means letting go because the relationship has become harmful. Real love doesn't mean tolerating everything. That's important. Love without boundaries can become self-destruction. You can love someone and still say no. You can care about someone and still protect your peace. You can forgive someone and still decide that certain behavior cannot continue. You can wish someone well and still walk away. Because real love respects dignity. And you should never have to destroy yourself to prove that you love another person. Healthy love makes room for two people. Not one person disappearing inside the other. This is why self-respect matters. The strongest relationships aren't built by two incomplete people desperately clinging to each other. They are built by two people who understand their own worth and freely choose partnership. They don't say, "Without you, I am nothing." They say, "My life has value, and I am grateful to share part of it with you." That is healthier. That is stronger. And that kind of love has room to breathe. Now imagine what happens when two people reach this level. They start thinking about the future. Not because someone pressured them. Because it naturally makes sense. They start talking about goals. Homes. Family. Travel. Work. Responsibilities. Dreams. They begin asking, "What kind of life do we want?" And that question is different from, "How do I keep this person interested?" The focus has shifted. From attraction to construction. From excitement to purpose. From temporary feelings to long-term decisions. This is when love becomes truly real. And perhaps that is the moment many people misunderstand. They think love becomes real when someone says, "I love you." But words are only the beginning. Love becomes real when someone demonstrates it consistently. When they choose honesty. When they choose loyalty. When they choose respect. When they choose patience. When they choose responsibility. When they choose to communicate instead of manipulate. When they choose to protect your trust. When they choose to grow. That's when words become believable. And if someone truly loves you, you won't have to spend your entire life trying to convince them of your worth. They may not always express themselves perfectly. They may have different love languages. They may sometimes make mistakes. But their overall pattern will tell you something. Their behavior will have direction. Their effort will have consistency. Their respect will be visible. And you will begin feeling something you may not have felt before. Peace. Not because you know exactly what tomorrow will bring. Nobody does. But because you trust the person beside you to face tomorrow honestly. That's a completely different feeling. And perhaps you've been waiting for that. A relationship where you don't have to constantly ask, "Do they still care?" Because you can see it. A relationship where you don't have to decode silence. Because communication exists. A relationship where you don't have to compete. Because commitment is clear. A relationship where you can be vulnerable. Because your heart is safe. A relationship where you can disagree. Because respect remains. A relationship where you can grow. Because neither person is trying to keep the other small. That is what love becomes when it is truly real. It becomes a place where two people can become better without becoming less of themselves. And there is something else that happens. You become grateful for ordinary moments. You realize that love isn't only the anniversary. It's breakfast. It's grocery shopping. It's sitting together after a long day. It's laughing about something that nobody else would understand. It's sending a random message because something reminded you of them. It's knowing that someone is waiting for you to come home. It's hearing their voice after a difficult day. It's sharing silence without feeling uncomfortable. These moments may never become dramatic stories. But they become your life. And life is mostly made of ordinary moments. So perhaps the greatest love isn't the one that gives you the most dramatic story. Perhaps it is the one that makes ordinary life feel meaningful. The person who can sit beside you when nothing exciting is happening and still make you feel grateful. The person whose presence doesn't require entertainment. The person you can build routines with. The person who makes home feel less like a place and more like a feeling. That is powerful. And when love becomes truly real, you begin understanding that forever isn't created in one decision. It is created through many small decisions. Today. Tomorrow. Next week. Next year. Again and again. I choose you. Not because every day will be perfect. But because the relationship is worth the effort. And that's the kind of commitment that lasts. Not blind commitment. Conscious commitment. The kind that knows there will be challenges and chooses honesty anyway. The kind that knows people change and chooses to keep learning each other. The kind that understands that relationships require maintenance. Just like a garden. You cannot plant something beautiful and never water it. You cannot expect trust to remain strong without honesty. You cannot expect intimacy without communication. You cannot expect closeness without time. Love must be cared for. And when both people understand that, something extraordinary can happen. The relationship begins becoming stronger than the individual moments. One bad day doesn't define it. One argument doesn't destroy it. One misunderstanding doesn't erase years of connection. There is perspective. There is history. There is grace. There is a willingness to repair. And that is why real love can survive. Not because it is invincible. Because it is resilient. It knows how to bend without breaking. It knows how to recover. It knows how to apologize. It knows how to start again. And maybe starting again is one of the most romantic things two people can do. After a difficult conversation, they choose to try again. After a misunderstanding, they choose to understand. After disappointment, they choose to communicate. After fear, they choose courage. After distance, they choose connection. That is love becoming real. So if you are wondering what happens when love becomes truly real, look beyond the butterflies. Look beyond the dramatic messages. Look beyond the perfect photographs. Look beyond the promises. Look at what happens when life becomes ordinary. Look at how someone treats you when they are tired. Look at how they respond when you disagree. Look at whether they respect your boundaries. Look at whether they can apologize. Look at whether they support your growth. Look at whether you can be honest. Look at whether you feel safe. Look at whether the relationship gives you more clarity than confusion. Those things matter. Because real love is not simply something you hear. It is something you experience. You experience it in consistency. You experience it in respect. You experience it in patience. You experience it in small sacrifices. You experience it in honesty. You experience it in the freedom to be yourself. And eventually, you realize something. You are no longer trying to convince someone to love you. You are simply participating in a love that already exists. That is a completely different experience. There is no constant chase. There is no constant fear. There is no endless performance. There is simply two people showing up. And perhaps that is what many hearts have been searching for all along. Not perfection. Not fantasy. Not someone who never makes mistakes. Someone who cares enough to make things right. Someone who understands that your heart is valuable. Someone who doesn't treat your feelings like an inconvenience. Someone who can disagree without disrespecting you. Someone who can love you without controlling you. Someone who can stand beside you without demanding that you stop becoming yourself. And if you find that kind of connection, appreciate it. Protect it. Communicate. Don't take consistency for granted. Don't wait until someone is gone to recognize what their presence meant. Tell them. Show them. Make the effort. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't created by extraordinary people. They are created by ordinary people who repeatedly make extraordinary choices. They choose honesty when lying would be easier. They choose forgiveness when pride would be easier. They choose communication when silence would be easier. They choose patience when anger would be easier. They choose commitment when running away would be easier. That is courage. And love requires courage. Because to truly love someone means allowing yourself to be known. It means taking emotional risks. It means accepting that you cannot control everything. It means trusting someone with parts of your heart that you normally protect. But when that trust is respected, something beautiful develops. You become less afraid of being seen. You stop hiding. You stop pretending. You can finally say, "This is me. And here. I see you." Not an idealized version. Not a perfect version. You. And that is one of the deepest experiences a person can have. To be seen and still valued. To be understood and still respected. To be imperfect and still loved. To be growing and still supported. That is real intimacy. That is real love. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that when two people experience this, they don't just change their relationship. They change each other. They become more patient. More thoughtful. More honest. More compassionate. They learn to listen. They learn to communicate. They learn that love isn't about always getting your way. It's about building something where both people matter. And that lesson can change an entire life. So remember this. When love becomes truly real, it doesn't always become louder. Sometimes it becomes quieter. It becomes more stable. More intentional. More peaceful. More honest. The need to impress disappears. The need to manipulate disappears. The need to constantly prove something disappears. And what remains is simple. Two people. Two hearts. Two imperfect lives. One shared decision to treat each other with care. That is enough. And if love is truly meant to remain, it will not need constant drama to prove that it exists. It will reveal itself through consistency. Through actions. Through respect. Through patience. Through the willingness to grow. Through the courage to have difficult conversations. Through the ability to forgive. Through the choice to keep showing up. That is what happens when love becomes truly real. It stops being something you merely feel. It becomes something you live. It becomes visible in the way you speak. The way you listen. The way you protect each other's dignity. The way you handle conflict. The way you celebrate each other. The way you stand together during difficult seasons. And perhaps one day, after everything you've experienced together, you will look at that person and realize, I thought love would be a moment. But it became a life. It wasn't one perfect conversation. It wasn't one unforgettable night. It wasn't one dramatic confession. It was thousands of little moments. The messages. The laughter. The apologies. The forgiveness. The ordinary mornings. The difficult evenings. The celebrations. The setbacks. The moments when one person said, I'm here. And the other believed them. That's how real love grows. Slowly. Quietly. Deeply. Until one day you realize that what once felt uncertain has become steady. What once felt fragile has become strong. What once felt like a possibility has become a reality. And perhaps that is the greatest secret about genuine love. It doesn't simply make you feel wanted. It makes you feel known. It doesn't simply make you excited. It makes you feel safe. It doesn't simply promise tomorrow. It helps you build tomorrow. It doesn't ask you to become someone else. It gives you room to become your best self. And it doesn't demand perfection. It asks for truth. So if love is entering your life, or if an existing connection is becoming deeper, don't measure it only by intensity. Measure it by consistency. Measure it by peace. Measure it by respect. Measure it by growth. Measure it by how both people behave when life isn't romantic. Because that's where the truth appears. Anyone can hold your hand during a beautiful sunset. Real love holds your hand through uncertainty. Anyone can say, I will always be here, when everything is easy. Real love demonstrates presence when everything becomes difficult. Anyone can promise. Real love participates. And when you finally experience that, you'll understand why the waiting mattered. Why the lessons mattered. Why the difficult relationships taught you something. Why the disappointments forced you to develop boundaries. Why the lonely seasons taught you to value yourself. Sometimes you needed those lessons so that when genuine love arrived, you would recognize it. You would not confuse chaos with passion. You would not confuse attention with commitment. You would not confuse jealousy with love. You would recognize peace. You would recognize honesty. You would recognize consistency. You would recognize someone who doesn't merely want to have you in their life, but wants to contribute something meaningful to your life. And you would understand that love isn't about finding someone who completes your missing pieces. It is about finding someone with whom you can build something greater without losing yourself. That is partnership. That is maturity. That is connection. And that is what happens when love becomes truly real. The heart becomes calmer. The conversations become deeper. The actions become stronger. The future becomes clearer. The relationship becomes less about proving and more about building. And two people who once wondered where this connection might go begin realizing that they are already creating something. Something that cannot be measured by one message. One date. One photograph. One promise. It is measured by time. By trust. By effort. By everything they choose to do when nobody is watching. So don't overlook the quiet signs. The person who remembers. The person who listens. The person who respects. The person who apologizes. The person who stays consistent. The person who celebrates your growth. The person who gives you freedom while remaining present. The person who doesn't make you question your worth. The person who makes love feel less like a battle and more like a partnership. Those things matter. Because when love becomes truly real, you don't spend every day wondering whether you are loved. You begin living inside the answer. And perhaps that is the most beautiful ending to the story. Not. They lived happily ever after. But. They kept choosing each other honestly, even when life wasn't easy. That is much more real. That is much more powerful. And that is the kind of love worth building. Because real love is not a perfect story. It is two imperfect people creating something beautiful through thousands of imperfect moments. It is choosing kindness. Choosing honesty. Choosing respect. Choosing patience. Choosing growth. Choosing forgiveness. Choosing each other. Again. And again. And again. Until one day, you look back and realize that the love you were searching for wasn't hidden inside one magical moment. It was built inside all the little moments that came after. And that is what happened when love became truly real. It became more than a feeling. It became trust. It became peace. It became partnership. It became home. And most importantly, it became a choice that both hearts were willing to make, not once, but every single day.